Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Experts of the Americas series. I am Valentina Sader, the Associate Director and Brazil Lead at the Atlantic Council's Adrian Irish Latin America Center. I am delighted to be joined here today by Secretary Rosito. She's Secretary for International Affairs at Brazil's Ministry of Finance. Secretary Tatiana Rosito, it's a pleasure to have you join us here at the Atlantic Council Studios in Washington, D.C. And with that, I wanted to ask you a question about your trip to DC. You are here in Washington for your first official trip to the United States. Just before President Lula goes to China, and you also join him in that. But I wanted to ask you about your priorities with U.S. Brazil trade and economic relations, trade and financial relations, and that trade and investment relations, as well as your trip here to the U.S. What were the priorities? What's the outcome of this visit?
Thank you, Valentina. I'm also delighted to be here with you. Thank you for hosting us at the Atlantic Council. This trip, I came to the IMFC deputies meeting, started with that, and then also in view of the previous meeting between President Biden and Lula, it's also a good time to make a follow-up on the financial and economic area. We have met with the U.S. Treasury. We had meetings also at the State Department. And some meetings in think tanks, and came to the Atlantic Council. So my visit to DC is also an opportunity to not only to reconnect with U.S. authorities in different areas, but also to organizing our G20 presidency. We'll be coordinating the finance track. So it has been an opportunity to talk to special international organizations here that do support work to the G20.
That is super important. Thank you for sharing that, Tatiana, and also thinking about the priorities for Brazil in particular. How do you see, and how is the new administration in Brazil really looking to make the business environment in Brazil easier for investment, for foreign investment, and for trade?
So I think the big priority, the big theme is to have great growth back, right? And be in the path of sustainable development with strong growth and the creation of jobs. That said, the importance of one of the main themes now is the tax reform. As you know, there is at the Ministry of Finance, there has been extraordinary secretariat for tax reform that has been created. Mm-hmm. The plan is to, and this is already public, is to send to Congress a proposal on consumption tax within the first half of the year, and also following on that proposal for income and corporate tax. And the idea is for Congress to examine and ideally also approve this tax reform, which is a mature issue that has been in discussion in Brazil for a long time. There are at least two proposals of constitutional amendments at Congress in the moment, and we do think this is a game changer. This could be a game changer for Brazil and for investors, including American investors, would really not only facilitate the day-to-day operations and the costs of different companies, but also make the business environment for investment and for trade easier on both directions.
That's so important, and there has definitely been a conversation that we here at the Atlantic Council have been having for a long time also in terms of tax reform and how to make U.S.-Brazil trade and investment relations closer and more collaborative in most ways. We actually published a report not too long ago about mechanisms and steps that Brazil and the United States could both take in order to have stronger economic relations. And I think that this is something that we should definitely look into. Tax reform was definitely part of that conversation. As we are talking about making the business environment easier for investment and easier for trade in general, one of the priorities of the new Lula administration in Brazil, especially with regards to foreign policy, is on the environment and in climate in particular. My question to you then is on how the Ministry of Finance and your role in particular as Secretary for International Affairs, how is the Ministry of Finance supporting that initiative and that effort? How can we see the Ministry of Finance bringing this priority into the domestic field as well, into the domestic level?
No, thank you for this question, Valentina. I think this is really a whole of the government effort that has started even before President Lula took office, when he went to Egypt to the COP last year. And now also it's still a whole of the government effort. Very important role for the Minister of Finance, because when you talk about really transforming your economy to a low carbon economy and really putting in place instruments to have a low carbon and green development, you talk about incentives, you talk about prices, right? You talk not only pricing, but tax and incentives. So many issues that depends on policies that will rely not solely but heavily and centrally in the Ministry of Finance. So I think one way is that, so this is an issue that is coordinated by the civil household in Brazil. Mm-hmm. So we have an interministerial climate change committee for that, and that's where most of the decisions will be taken. And actually, there is also a higher council on that. So this is really a whole of the government approach. But from there are discussions already to exploring issues like taxonomy, the adoption of taxonomies. There is also an ongoing work of the central bank on asset classification, the issue of carbon markets that is there to be further explored. So there are a lot of issues pertaining to carbon pricing that we'll be dealing with. On top of that, for us, especially in the Secretariat for International Affairs, we deal with the issue of climate basically in all our interactions with multilateral development banks. As you know, this has been an issue that has been, if not formally, but in practice, streamlined in all organizations. It's also very important for us. We would like to see climate fully incorporated in a way that also is done in tandem with other very important objectives in terms, traditional objectives of, for example, combating poverty, raising inclusion, and sharing the benefits of it. So we are working at the boards of MDBs together with other partner members to make sure also that we have processes of transformation and evolution, to use a word in particular that for the World Bank, where we also have a streamlining of the operational model, where this makes easier for countries. I mean, both, I think, donor and recipient countries to really make streamline climate in those institutions in a way that the resources could be more easily used.
Brazil definitely has a lot to share and to add to this conversation, and I'm glad that this is a priority for this administration and for you as well, in terms of where Brazil will be taking its approach in terms of the environment in general, climate financing. This is definitely something that we've heard quite a bit from private sector representatives too in Brazil, this interest to really push for a more carbon efficient and carbon neutral market. So I think this is very important, and especially as we see Brazil taking over the presidency and hosting the G20, definitely something that will be a topic of conversation. Definitely something that everyone is looking to hear from you is on the upcoming visit to China that President Lula will have next week. This is definitely one of the top priorities for this conversation in particular, but also as we see President Lula making all of these stops to Brazil's main trading partners, first with Argentina, Uruguay, and then the United States not too long ago, and now China. What is the expectation for this trip in particular? What can we expect will come out of this trip? We know that there is a big delegation of private sector representatives as well as government officials going to China in this trip. What can we expect as the main outcome of this meeting between President Lula and Xi Jinping?
So, no, we also have high expectations for the trip. As you know, the trip was announced back then, together with the trip of President Lula to the US. It really will include a large delegation, including from the business sector, the private sector. I think there are also the expectations also have to be not only with the fact that it's for President Lula, his first trip to China in this new government, right? And so he has been very active personally in, let's say, bringing Brazil back to the global stage. And China is, our not only our largest trade partner, but also we have a global partnership with China. It's also member of the BRICS. So this is an important trip politically, but also the fact that many people that are joining this delegation haven't been to China, maybe for 3 years, right? So everyone has been doing or trying to do many times business, by video calls or calls. So this is a reopening in a sense. I think this adds a lot to the expectation on that. Then on top of that, we also have, I think we have high expectations for, this new moment, how China will fit in this new moment for Brazil of pursuing much more, deeply green growth and green reindustrialization. China has very already solid investments in Brazil. The two countries are very complementary, right? And finally, I think there is also a very important point. President Lula is also going to Shanghai, right, where he'll visit the NDB.
Yes.
And it'll be the first opportunity where he'll be at the NDB with the new president that to be elected, the former President Dilma Rousseff. So President Lula will visit Shanghai for that. And so those are some of the highlights of the trip.
A lot of expectation, not only around this trip, but also in terms of President Lula's approach to foreign policy in general, especially as we are looking now into World Bank and IMF meetings coming up soon. I'm sure that we are going to be hearing much more from you, as well as from Minister Haddad around this trip and when you come to Washington, D.C. for those meetings. But Tatiana, for now, Secretary Rosito, I would love to thank you for your participation. Thank you for coming to Washington, D.C. and to come here to the Atlantic Council to have this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that we're going to be seeing each other very often and much more very soon as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for watching us. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Valentina.
Thank you.